Chat?
Okay, then it says chat, meeting settings, would that be it?
So
No.
right where your
Look here.
where your picture is,
Okay.
if you put the hand up at
Tell
the
me
top.
what your name is and I'll change it. Your last name is the same?
Yes.
Yeah,
First name,
Dan,
Sam?
Dan.
D-A-N.
Oh, D-A-N, okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
I don't want her to take my name away because I need it.
Yeah. Well, it's just for this meeting. Participants.
I'm going to start on time because I believe in rewarding the good people and punishing the bad people.
As long as we're not being judgmental.
Right. It's basic operant conditioning. I'm a big believer in B.F. Skinner.
Mhm.
Right. No, not at all.
Well, we've got two presenters that need to be here yet and an ASL
Well, that's a
interpreter that
good
need-
point. Yeah. Now, David told me that he might not be able to get on. But there's Laura. There's Laura. So, hi, Laura. And David's idea was, you know, if he didn't get on time, we just open it up and see what people are thinking about. What do you think, Jim? Should we start with Laura if David's not here?
Well, Laura's probably connecting up.
Yes.
I'm here, but I have to turn my video and audio off for a couple minutes to just get myself situated with the baby. So I'm here, but I need a couple minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Take some time.
Okay. Good to see you. I'll be
Good to
back in a
see you,
couple
Laura.
minutes.
You look great, Laura.
Thanks. So do you. I love the psych rights background. It looks awesome. Okay, I'll be back.
This is Lori again. I want to thank you again now that we saw Laura, and I don't follow people really closely, but it sounds like she had a baby. And I want to thank you all because the most fear in my life is that my son was going to wake up someday and just go psychotic because of his genes. And of all of this, I found out that will never happen. And no one is ever going to have my son chained down in some psychiatric hospital because of all of your work. And that's not going to happen to Laura's baby either. They're telling this lie, and their horrible treatment of us makes us not be able to care for our child. But that didn't happen for me. And I just wanted to mention that. Thank you. You saved not only me, but my son. It's a cycle of abuse, and but I just keep expressing gratitude to everyone who worked in getting the truth out.
People who were breaking into the Capitol were listening intently to everything that Trump was tweeting and saying that day, and it took hours for him to say something.
Someone's
so
radio
we have
is
the
on.
radio on.
Yeah, I think it is a good idea for us to mute ourselves if we're not talking. I think it cuts down on some of the noise. Get in the way.
I'm
Al, just so you know, this is Laura. I'm still here. I still am off video muted because of the baby, but I'm here. So just so you know.
Okay, good. Thanks. Yeah, so we'll start. We'll go ahead and start. So I want to welcome you all to Judy's room. This is Judy's room. It's a collaboration between Mind Freedom International and I Love You Lead On, which is Mind Freedom International is an organization that advocates for human rights and mental health, has been for about 30 years. I don't know much about I Love You Lead On, but I think it's Susan's organization, and Susan has spends her life helping people with various kinds of disabilities. And so this is a collaboration between these two organizations, and we commemorate Judy Chamberlain, who was the author of On Your Own, and who was a tremendous energy behind the psychiatric survivor movement to advocate for human rights and mental health, to oppose forced drugging, forced commitment, forced treatment, and to advocate for choice and mental health, and for openness, more openness, and more understanding of what this is all about. So the topic for today is psychiatric drugs and withdrawal, and we have three presenters. David Cohen is a professor at UCLA. He's a professor in the Luskin School of Public Affairs, and he spends his time researching what he says the desirable and the undesirable the characteristics of psychiatric drugs. He's really an expert on psychiatric drugs, and he told me he might be a little bit late. So when he comes, we'll get him on. Then our second presenter is Laura Delano. Laura is the founder and executive director of Inner Compass, which does a lot of things. And one of the things it does is help people make informed decisions about drugging, about diagnoses, about withdrawing from drugs, about finding alternatives to medication and diagnosis, and leads workshops on safe withdrawal from drugs. So she's our second presenter. Our third presenter is Jim Gottstein, who is the author of the Zyprexa Papers, which is a book about the duplicity and the lack of transparency and essentially the criminality of the drug companies, and also about how difficult it is for people who get caught in the involuntary commitment system, where people get harmed by forced treatment, forced drugging, how difficult it is, and how difficult it is to help them. And Jim is also the founder and executive director of Psych Rights, which is an organization that is engaged in a strategic litigation campaign against forced drugging and electroshock. So those are our three presenters. And so what we'll do is have each of the presenters make a presentation, brief presentation for maybe 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, something like that. And then we'll open it up for questions, comments, etc. And I see that David is with us, so I'm happy about that. Hello, David. So we're going to start with David. David is the co-author with Peter Breggin of a book entitled "Your Drug May Be Your Problem: How and Why You Should Stop Taking Psychiatric Medications." He's also a professor at UCLA in the Luskin School of Public Affairs. So we'll start off with David. You're on, David. You're muted. Muted.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah, if you have a
I
volume
think-
thing, maybe a little higher in the volume if you got it.
Is this better?
That's good.
I think the phrase "you're on mute" is going to be one of the defining phrases of the 21st century. I'm really happy to be here in such great company too. I see Laura Delano. Hi, Laura, and Jim. Hello, and other somewhat familiar faces too. So many of them. So I thought what I would do to start is just to give an overview from my vantage point of how the topic of withdrawal from psychiatric drugs has evolved over the last 30 years. I say 30 years because I've been observing the withdrawal scene pretty closely for 32 years. As a researcher, as an author of a couple of books, a French language book in 1995 that focused on withdrawal, and then with Peter Breggin in 1999, and a number of articles around withdrawal. And then I was also consulting with people for, I would say, at least 20 years around the world, but mostly in Canada and the US, who wish to leave psychiatric drugs or were trying to do it or had a bad reaction doing it. And some I was able to follow for 3 years, a couple of people, 7 years, 8 years. So I had that perspective. And I conducted many reviews of the literature, the psychiatric literature, the nursing literature, the pharmacy literature on withdrawal over this period of time. So I just wanted to, and I've seen the field move. It moved. I'm just going to say a few little themes. One theme is called withdrawal or discontinuation. And that's two key words that were in the 90s the subject of a debate. What was this going to be called? Were we going to call it withdrawal or discontinuation? The charge was leveled that the drug companies were introducing the word discontinuation in order to muddy the waters, in order to say this is not withdrawal like from alcohol or from the drugs that were the opiates, where everyone seemed to understand what a withdrawal reaction from a psychiatric drug would be, from a psychoactive drug. So because of that, because of the wish to not equate the prescribed drugs to the illicit or addiction-inducing drugs, another word was used called discontinuation, which would make it just more innocuous, a different kind of phenomenon that would hit you as you were trying to stop taking a psychiatric drug. So there was that debate that was going on. And how has it been resolved? I would say it's been resolved now. It's been resolved by people using the word discontinuation to refer to the process of coming off a drug, the actions, the procedures. That's called discontinuation. Whether it's wanted or unwanted, whether it's prescribed or self-initiated, it's discontinuation now. The consensus in the mainstream literature is it's about the process of coming off, whereas withdrawal is now taken to mean the effects of discontinuation. So that's how the compromise has sort of worked itself out. This is an interesting evolution, though I'm giving it to you very briefly. First, a debate as to, no, let's not use this word, let's use that word, or, it's not addiction and withdrawal, it's just something else, to now there is an equivalence that all psychoactive drugs might induce these changes in the brain and the nervous system. And the process of coming off is discontinuation, and the effects of coming off are withdrawal. So that's one change you'll see. Whether it's significant or not, it may not be to you, but it was a big change. Another one had to do with the change between how long does this problem that some people have coming off a drug and these really unpleasant effects that they're experiencing, these complaints they're expressing, how long does that last? Well, in the 90s, it was 2 to 3 days. At most, a couple of weeks. It was called self-limiting. That word self-limiting meaning something that resolves on its own. And, but that phrase was immediately accompanied or followed by another phrase, within 2 to 3 days. That was what you saw early. Then I remember seeing on a consistent basis within 4 to 5 days. And then there was a lull, and now it's quite recognized, at least in a number of mainstream journals, that mostly because of the work, I would say, of John Reed. John Reed, British, Australian psychologist. Many of you might have seen him in a podcast or presentation. He systematically reviewed the literature, and in a couple of papers coming out in lately, 2017, 18, 19, he just showed, and surveys that he conducted with his colleagues, he showed that most people complained for weeks and months. Almost half of the samples that he was surveying were saying that this problem of coming off the drug is lasting for at least several weeks, often several months. It's not so self-limiting. It's not mild, as that was also used, mild, in the drug company literature and the other. He says he's finding different stuff. It's severe, it's serious, it's not self-limiting, it's dragging on, it's protracted. And so the literature has also shifted a lot in those 30 years, that to recognize that the process is not self-limiting, it's not mild often, and it can often be very long, very disabling, and protracted, and may last months or years. The other question is just benzos and stimulants maybe, or all the psychiatric drugs? And again, that was a very complex problem. I recall going on TV shows in 1998, 1999, and being, ridiculed for saying, I have clients, people that I know who've been trying to get off this for several years and who are in the most utter pain, and the syndrome they're experiencing is so complex, and big experts are not able to diagnose it properly. Neither can I. I don't know what's going on, but it is a mix of pain and neurological spasms and incredible fatigue. And it all points to a drug withdrawal syndrome, but it's hard to know for sure, but that's what it looks like. And people would just literally laugh and think that I was off my rocker. And so that has also evolved. There's more acceptance now in the mainstream literature for the existence of protracted withdrawals from drugs besides benzodiazepines. Heather Ashton, who passed away a year ago, was the one who popularized the notion of protracted withdrawal syndromes from benzodiazepines. But now it's beginning to be understood that it could occur with antidepressants. It certainly could occur with antipsychotics too. That was previously recognized for antipsychotics, namely the movement disorders, often called withdrawal dyskinesias, that occurred when people stopped antipsychotics, but nothing else. None of the triggering of maybe psychosis or mania or other things that would directly link to withdrawal, to the speed of the withdrawal, the abruptness of the withdrawal. That is much more accepted today. So that today, it's not just people trying to figure, is it withdrawal or is it relapse? Meaning, is it a problem that is occurring because of how you're coming off the drug? Or is it just that you're no longer taking the drug, therefore your original, quote, disorder is now taking over and coming back? So was it that simple choice? Today, some of the most mainstream deans of psychopharmacology in the United States, Ross Baldessarini, Harvard-based, Guy Chouinard, who's been at this for almost 50 years and is, these are bio people, recognize fully in print in good journals that there are protracted withdrawals, unacknowledged, tardive stress syndromes, iatrogenic, treatment-induced leftovers that exist only because you've been on a drug. That's all. Just because you've been on a drug and you've stopped taking that drug, nothing else. Not because you're mentally ill from before or because you have an untreated problem. Simply because you've been on a drug and maybe long enough, you might be suffering from some protracted, unclear, tardive stress syndrome just because you've been on a drug. So that's something that very few people would mention in the 90s. Peter Bregan, David Healy, myself, Joanna Moncrief later on. Nobody else would word that. Now it is being accepted and discussed in the conventional literature. So those are some of the changes that have occurred. I hear some loud sound. So what's left? And I don't want to extend too much now, but what are some of the questions that are left that have maybe evolving or that have not evolved so much yet? One is, maybe someone should, I think it's Lisa.
Lisa?
Could be, is
I'm
it
not
Lisa?
sure.
Lisa,
Yeah.
would you mute, please?
To mute. I can't find who it is that's
So it's Lisa.
Yes, I thought it was. It's me walking around the house on crutches. Let me mute my.
Thank you.
Now you're mute, David.
A couple of points are left to be debated. There are many more, but a couple from my vantage point that are very important. One is the role of psychological, interpersonal, and larger social factors in the very experience of withdrawal effects. So is it just, is it all reducible to neurobiology? It's you took a drug, there's been an adaptation, the drug's removed, the adaptations are overshooting, and that's withdrawal symptoms? Or is there something else? For example, as we are ourselves discussing right now, we're talking in a group, we're exchanging ideas, hopefully soon, about this. I bet that this discussion and our participation, though we haven't all injected a drug this moment, is going to affect how one of the members here will experience withdrawal effects. In other words, as we exchange ideas, information, we change the nature of what will occur inside us, how we'll relate to the withdrawal effects, how we'll interpret them, how we'll feel them. So this is what I'm trying to say, kind of in simple words. It's not all reducible to neurobiology. It's reducible also to not having been given proper information that you could get a withdrawal effect from this drug, as occurs all the time. In fact, 10 minutes before I came on, I just took my message from some person that I don't know, who described on the telephone, left me a message about some terrible situation of, this is what's happening to my son as I removed his Zyprexa. Don't know why she did it or why not. And she's describing some scene and said, but the doctor said, nothing like this could ever happen. And so, in other words, we're viewing phenomena and experiencing them because we have the wrong information. And that's not neurobiology. That's just living together. That's society. That's social. There are many issues like that that have to be resolved, which make the withdrawal experience kind of really hard to pin down, because it means, depending on our story, our experiences, our information, whether we believe we have a chemical imbalance, whether we believe we'll always need drugs or not, withdrawal will be experienced quite differently. And that's something to be worked out. That's a big question mark. How do we deal with this? And then the other issue, which is more ominous in a way, is to what extent is our withdrawal effects everywhere? Meaning to what extent are they contaminating the knowledge about drug effects that we take for granted from the textbooks? Every person who enters a drug trial in North America is undergoing withdrawal because they've been to another trial just a few weeks before, or they've been a patient who's taken off a drug in order to enter this trial. People are always withdrawing from drugs. And the portrait they give to the clinicians who rate them may be extremely different from what we call the natural course of mental illness, meaning some kind of idealized picture of how the problem is evolving, when in fact the problem is really maybe a drug reaction. So I don't know if I'm being clear here, but this is immense. And people like Ross Baldessarini and his colleague, I forget his first name, Tondo, both at Harvard, both believers in prescribing both biomedical model types. They, the possibility that a lot of what looks like what people call mental illness, psychiatric disorders out there in nature, are actually just complications of withdrawal effects. That's a big issue because it changes like how something presents, the diagnostic criteria that we use. Is that, it's like there was this old commercial in the old days about, is it live or is it Memorex? It had to do with the quality of sound that you taped in a studio. And the question today is, is this, the person's disorder, or is this withdrawal effects? That's the question. You can't quite tell anymore because we just don't know how deep the problem is. So that's what I wanted to leave you with. There's been an evolution in the conventional circles, and I'll leave Laura to talk about the other circles, more interesting, the alternative circles. A lot of changes going on there. They're up to speed with a lot of this stuff. The conventional circles, the traditional psychiatric circles had to take good 30 years to just come up to some of the speed where the alternative lay community circles are. And I believe my fear I have is now that the psychiatric world in a way wants to take this over and say, oh yeah, we were always on top of this. We always knew about this. And now we know what to do. And so everybody else move aside. Okay, that's my 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Also, just
Thank you, David. Thank you. That was a great intro. Appreciate it. So our next speaker, Laura Delano. As I said, Laura is the founder and executive director of Inner Compass, which is a charitable organization that really helps people in various ways to navigate this world. Drugs, coming off drugs, diagnoses, the mental health system, and helps families find alternatives to medication and diagnoses. And I should say that Laura herself is a patient, is a former patient. So, and she'll tell us about some of that, I'm sure. So Laura, thank you for being here, and we'll let you have the floor.
Thanks, Al, and thanks everyone, to the organizers for inviting me. I'm really glad I was able to step in at the last minute. Just to let everyone know, I have a baby here right now, a little baby who's nursing, and so you may hear some strange grunting sounds and squeaks and things like that. And hopefully he stays chill. But if things ramp up, I may have to just quickly slip off. And so Jim, maybe if you want to like be ready as if you were, in case you need to step in. But yeah, why don't I get started? David, you laid such a great foundation, and I love how you introduce those, just the power of language and how we make sense of all of this, and withdrawal, discontinuation, withdrawal, relapse, all of these, some I've heard people say, oh, it's semantics. It's like not a big deal, but it really is profound. The words we use to make sense of all of this shape how we experience ourselves, how we experience each other. And yeah, so you laid a great foundation. I'm going to take just a couple minutes to talk about my own experience with withdrawal. And then I'd like to really focus more on the broader layperson withdrawal community that I'm a part of, and what we're really doing, I guess, to help people get off of these drugs safely and successfully. Yeah, and I might use my experience a bit, like, because it's shaped so much of the work I do, is reflecting back on my own process of coming off. So basically I was put on these drugs, many of them over the course of 14 years, beginning when I was a kid, 13, given a bipolar diagnosis. I was an angry, irritable kid who was like cutting herself and super lost. And so, I ended up getting labeled bipolar because that was the prime time for this new wave of diagnosing juvenile bipolar disorder. And so I spent basically all of my teens and most of my 20s on a whole cocktail of different drugs, usually around between 3 to 6 at a time. And of course, never really feeling any better, but also never not having the capacity to step back and assess why that was. I just took for granted it was my so-called illness that was progressing, and it was treatment resistant. So the whole entire framework I used to make sense of myself, the framework my family used too, was just unquestioningly in line with what we were being told by the very prominent Harvard Medical School psychiatrists that I was being sent to, and the very fancy schmancy private hospitals that my parents were taking me to, because I was born into a family of means, a family that could provide for me in all kinds of ways. And I always share that when I'm sharing my story, because I think it played a big part in why I got so psychiatrized, but it also played a huge part in why and how I was able to get off the drugs and get out and really heal. So basically the decade and a half I was on these drugs, my life just, I'm really a story right out of Whitaker's Anatomy of an Epidemic. My life just progressively kept falling more and more apart, just losing connection with everything, with my physical health and my sexuality and my creativity and my ability to have relationships with people and my cognitive functioning, the whole shebang. And I spent my 20s, the first part of my 20s, completely dependent on my family to take care of me. I wasn't able to work. I was in and out of hospitals and programs. I thought about killing myself every day for many years, and then eventually did try to kill myself when I was 27. And I look back on that choice with a lot of respect, because I basically had reached the point where this story I was believing about who I was, that I had this incurable brain disease that was treatment resistant, basically that meant a future of barely living, of hospitals and doctors and never being able to take care of myself. And I realized that wasn't a life worth living. And so choosing that or choosing death, to me, death felt far more sane to choose. And so obviously I didn't die, and lots of things happened that led me to eventually decide to come off of these drugs and leave behind these diagnoses. The main catalysts there were several catalysts. The first three had to do with actually with experiencing force and coercion. I had a doctor call security on me, and they escorted me to a ward, and they gave me a choice of going voluntarily or involuntarily. I had a doctor call the police on me when I slept through an appointment to do a wellness check. And then I was made to take a drug when I was inpatient to keep me from drinking. I wasn't, luckily, I was so just indoctrinated into being compliant that I just said, okay, doctor. I didn't resist. And so I therefore was never violated, against my will in that way. But I didn't want to take that drug. I didn't realize that I could say no. So at that time, and because I'd never said no before, really. This all happened in 2010, I should say. And then the real spark for me after those experiences happened, each of which got me just thinking critically, really, for the first time, like, holy cow, how does this psychiatrist have the power to decide whether I get to breathe fresh air today or not? And who the hell does this psychologist think she is, calling the police to come to my apartment? Like, how dare she? And, how dare this psychopharmacologist on this ward who barely knows me tell me I have no choice, but I have to take this. So for the first time, really, in my mental patient career, I was asking questions, and I was thinking critically about my relationship to the system. And then I found Robert Whitaker's Anatomy of an Epidemic, and that sealed the deal. And so to move on to my withdrawal experience, at the time, this was back in 2010, I had no understanding that withdrawal even existed. That I might experience difficulties coming off of these drugs. It didn't occur to me. I had no, as David said, at some point he mentioned informed choice. For all of these years, I had never actually learned about what these drugs were doing and not doing in my body. I just took it all for granted, chemical imbalances being fixed and whatnot. And so when I realized I need to get out of the system, I need to get off of these drugs, I just wanted to do it as fast as I could. I didn't have any interest in coming off slowly. It didn't make sense to me. I was of the mindset that the longer these poisons were in my body, the more damage I would experience, and I just got to get them out. So I came off I was still in a program at the time at McLean Hospital. And so I was seeing the psychopharmacologist, still indoctrinated enough to feel like I needed his permission to try coming off. And so he was directing my quote unquote taper, which really wasn't a taper. So I came off of 5 drugs in about 5 months, which is really cold turkey. Having no idea that that's what I was doing. And it's really interesting. I love what David ended with, talking about how the experience of withdrawal isn't just physiological. It is also existential, psychological, spiritual. It's social. There's so many other factors that shape what the experience is. That's not me saying it's all in our heads, and if we just think if we just think it's going to go one way, it'll go that way. There obviously is a real physiological component, a profound one. But I think back on my experience, and I was just so in the dark about withdrawal that I think that ignorance really served as a kind of bliss for me, because I didn't have this preconceived narrative of what was going to happen to me. I hadn't found the forums, the amazing forums like Surviving Antidepressants. I never thought to look there. And so I didn't have this fear of, oh my God, I'm going to go through all these horrible things. It's going to be X, Y, and Z. I just kind of bumbled along through this very rapid taper, and sure enough, it was hell on earth. But I think because I had, like, I think another big factor was just that I was so acclimated by that time to pain, really, and discomfort, because my life had been, you know, I had so many adverse effects from these drugs that I now see as adverse effects. Of course, for all those years, I thought they were symptoms of my illness, but I was just so used to being in pain that when the pain intensified, and you know, I had started to get migraines, and I like had random spontaneous vomiting, and I had these horrible boils on my skin that were just so painful, and I couldn't sleep, and I was just binge eating sugar like it was my job, and feeling so physically like sick in my stomach, like diarrhea, constipation, back and forth, like it was just hell. But I just somehow just like kept bumbling along, because I wasn't constructing a fixed meaning about what this all meant. I wasn't saying to myself, this is going to be the next X number of years of my life, or this is a relapse, or I didn't really have any story, because I was so focused on what I like to call this beacon that I mean, at the time, I didn't think of it as that, only retrospectively do I, but I was so curious to find out who I could be off of these drugs. I needed to find out after reading Anatomy, and after then reading Moncrief and like all these other important researchers and journalists who just helped me understand, you know, the whole diagnostic paradigm and what load of, you know, what it was and all of it. I just needed to know who I was off of these drugs. So that's what I was focused on. I wasn't telling myself, I wasn't defining my withdrawal in any kind of way for myself. So to fast forward, the first few years were really hard. And again, I bring up the life I was born into here, because I was unable to work. I was unable to take care of myself really much at all. Like I barely showered. I just like went to 12-step meetings all the time because I'd quit drinking, and like that was all I did. And then I'd lived with my extended family, and I just watched TV and stayed up really late because I couldn't sleep, and was going to treatment like I was still in this program. And had I not been born into a family who could provide for me, I wouldn't have been able to keep going. There is no way that I could have done it, because I needed space and time to heal. I needed the removal of stressors from my life, whatever ones I had control over. I needed to be taken care of. And I am so lucky that my aunt and uncle and the rest of my family literally supported me for years in all these different ways, until I was healed enough to support myself, and which I had never done before, because I was psychiatrized as a kid. So I never really had an adult life before. I didn't know how to be an adult. And so I would say 3 years off was a big turning point, in that things started to feel like I really started to notice improvements. Improvements were happening before then, I should say. I don't mean to like freak anyone out, but 3 years off, I really felt like, wow, I'm actually like alive. I actually feel like I'm here. 5 years off I was convinced that I was fully healed at that point, because I had come alive so much. And now I'm over 10 years off, and I look back at 5 years off and I'm like, holy shit, I had no idea what was in store for me. You know, like having a fucking child, like, excuse the F-bomb, never in a million years would I have ever thought that I would be healed enough physically and like in all these other ways to bring a child into the world. And so I can't remember when it was soon after I came off, I guess, but I found myself called to helping others who wanted to forge ahead on this journey as well. I just couldn't leave this behind. Like sometimes I fantasize, like I wish I just got off these drugs and then like went and got some random job and just lived an ordinary life and had nothing to do with this whole thing. But something in me, which I think obviously all of you here probably have the same thing, just couldn't let me not. And so I began to reflect on my experiences and really think about like, what was it that I needed that helped me get out, that helped me wake up, that helps me get off the drugs, that helps me heal. And I began to like formulate in my mind, like what would an organization look like that could help people like learn about all of these things that I learned about myself, and that would connect people to each other who are going through this, that would help people find alternative ways to navigate distress, whether it's distress caused by withdrawal or by the drugs you're on or by life. And so in 2000, I don't even know what year, I'm tired right now. It's like 3 years ago. I don't even, what are we, 2021? Through a seed grant, and with the help of a few other people, we launched this nonprofit Intercompass initiative that basically our mission isn't, we're not anti-drug, we're not anti-psychiatry, we're pro-informed choice. And I just think strategically, if we're going to reach beyond the choir, it's really important to frame how we talk about all of these ideas in that way. And so we're all about helping people get free access to everything they need to know about the drugs themselves, about the diagnostic paradigm, about how psychiatric drugs are brought to market, like what the research process looks like and how corrupt it is, really, how they're marketed and how corrupt that is. And then we have a whole separate website called the Withdrawal Project that basically our goal is that it serves as a one-stop shop for everything you need to know about how to prepare yourself to come off of these drugs and come off, because preparation prior to withdrawal, prior to actually starting to reduce your dose, is so important. People stop cold turkey with no preparation and make it through. I hear those stories, but my view is that there's no way to know if you're going to be one of the lucky ones who can get off these drugs really quickly with no problems. And so it's a risk assessment. Like if it's up to each person to decide that, but the way the Withdrawal Project frames that decision is that like if you want the greatest chances of coming off safely and successfully, thinking through the story you're telling yourself about your pain, about what the drugs are and how they're affecting you, about withdrawal, thinking through your like getting informed about psychiatric drug dependence and tolerance and what withdrawal actually is, thinking about your relationship to your prescriber, to your family, your physical health, and your relationship to pain. There's so much that can go in that if you take the time in advance of coming off to think this all through, to put together plans, to create a support system if you're able to. Not everyone is, I want to acknowledge that. Then you just are so much better set up to have a successful taper. And so we have a companion guide that has a whole prepare section, and then the actual taper section, which is where we help people learn about the drugs that they're on. So we have a guide that helps you read the actual drug label, not the consumer pamphlet that's like 2 pages that you get at the pharmacy, but the actual like 40-page drug label that the pharmaceutical industry doesn't want you to see. We help you learn what each section means in that, how it pertains to withdrawal. We help you learn about taper rates, the rates that the layperson withdrawal community finds to be the most, safe. How to set up a schedule of your taper, what method you're going to use. For example, do you If you're taking a capsule with little beads in it, do you count beads? Do you weigh beads on a scale? If you're taking a tablet, do you crush it and weigh it on a digital scale? Do you make a liquid mixture out of it? Do you go to a compounding pharmacy? Do you get a manufacturer's liquid? Like there are all these different ways to do it. We help people in step-by-step detail, teach themselves how to do it. Other things too, I'm going on too long, but what I want to end with is that what I think is the most valuable, what I think has the most power and potential to really change things that we have to offer are our Connect platforms. We have these two networking platforms, and all of this is free. And to me, it's very important that these resources are free. These Connect platforms help people find one another in their local communities. You can also find people online too, but obviously with COVID like local organizing, grassroots, in-person stuff isn't really happening. But I think there is nothing more threatening to the mental health industry than neighborhoods coming together and actually helping each other, and people in towns and cities finding one another who are, coming off drugs, or family members of people stuck in the system finding each other and organizing and supporting each other, mutual aid wise, and all of that. And so we have these platforms that help that. I guess to wrap up, I think what I find and what I'm really curious to hear others share about too is, I think withdrawal, psychiatric drug withdrawal, David, I'm so curious to hear your thoughts on this too. To me, psychiatric drug withdrawal has the potential to like radically transform how we construct and disseminate knowledge and expertise in our society. I think we live, in Western society where allopathic medicine reigns supreme. We put doctors and people with letters after their name on these pedestals, and really we see them as gods. And this mindset of, well, I'm not a doctor, so I couldn't possibly know this or help you with that. We're so unquestioning in that belief, and really in that practice of faith, because it's like a faith that we put in these doctors. And the layperson withdrawal community, which has been around for a long time, like way longer than I've been around, people like Adele, who, Alto Estrada, who started Surviving Antidepressants, like there's so much valuable knowledge and expertise among those of us who don't have letters after our names, who've been through it, who've been labeled crazy, who've been locked up on psych wards. And it's been so exciting to see doctors and lawyers and like all kinds of professionals starting to come to us for help. Like literally, I get emails from psychiatrists who say, will you help me help my patients, because I don't know what I'm doing. And I think, as David mentioned, there is this really concerning trend happening where the conventional, psychiatric industry is seeing this, and they're seeing withdrawal. Oh gosh, it's picking up momentum. We can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore. So let's pretend we've known about it all along, and let's make it seem like we know what to do. I see that happening. And to be honest, even within the the critical anti-psych world, there are lots of professionals who are, talking about how to bring people off of these drugs in ways that aren't necessarily as safe as what lay people are doing. And so I think we have this amazing opportunity before us to radically subvert like who the expert is, and like which direction knowledge is transferred. And like I fantasize about the day when someone with no letters after their name is like publishing a paper on withdrawal in some mainstream journal. And I really think if it's going to happen in the realm of medicine and the pharmaceutical industry and all that, it will be here, which is especially exciting because of course we lay people have been labeled crazy and our voices have been deemed invalid and insane. And so it would be especially satisfying if we could effectively do this. So which I think is possible. I'm very hopeful about that. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think it's possible. So I'll wrap up there, and I have no idea how long I went on for, and the baby's passed out on my boob, which is great. So I'm done now.
You went on exactly the right amount of time.
Okay. Wow, that doesn't happen often.
No, thank you, Laura. Thank you. Yeah, very helpful. And so our third presenter is Jim Gottstein, the founder and executive director of Law Project for Psychiatric Rights, known as Psych Rights, an organization that is basically engaged in a strategic litigation campaign to stop forced drugging and electroshock. And also, Jim is the author of Zyprexa Papers, a recently published book on the duplicity, the criminal negligence of the drug companies, a lack of transparencies, and also on how hard it is for people who do get forcibly treated and how hard it is to help them. So Jim, thank you for being here. You're on.
Thanks, Al. Thanks for having me. I'm Susan, can you enable screen sharing for me? When we went over it with, all right, well, I can just go on anyway. So
You should have.
we can do it.
We were able to see you okay.
Oops, you just disappeared somehow. Let's see what happened here. I think something happened and Jim got bumped off.
Well, hopefully he'll come back on. Meanwhile, I see some questions in the chat. Susan's been monitoring the chat.
Want me to read some of those? Let's see, I'll pull the chat up. The chat is not coming up.
I have some of them here. One of them is for David about children withdrawing. Do children withdraw in a different way?
So
that question about.
Yeah, I answered that very briefly directly to the person, I think, or maybe to the list, I forget. There's very, very, very little information on children's withdrawal reactions. And that also is worrying because, you know, just from stimulants, which are prescribed to about 8% of children under 16 in North America, in the United States, there are millions and millions of children on stimulants who are given holidays, off drugs, who are switched, taken off, put back on, taken off for months, put back on for days, skipping weekend doses, and there's gotta be a lot of withdrawal reactions. And it's not discussed. So I just reviewed the whole literature. I'm finishing a paper just on that to tell you on children's withdrawal reactions. There's so few papers, it's a shame. There's nothing out there. There's 12 papers, nothing. And so you know there's something that is not being discussed.
Right. Somebody asked a question, how do we create a public discussion to open space for doctors to come forward? To what extent are doctors who are beginning to realize some of the problems coming forward? David?
I can only speak about the example, the recent example of Mark Horowitz, and who's in Great Britain. He wrote an op-ed or a blog on Mad in America about 2 years ago. He's a psychiatrist, and he said, this is what happened when I tried to withdraw from antidepressants. It was the worst experience of my life. No one had told me about this. I knew nothing about this, and I was prescribing them myself. And that's what happened to me. And then he's really created a large space around him. He's now associate editor of a very of a journal called Therapeutic Advances in Psychopharmacology, which leads the Britain's elite of psychopharmacology and devotes issue after issue to airing the withdrawal question. So he's had by himself a lot of impact. They've published me, so they must mean something. The journal is having a lot of impact because it's very medical model, but it is taking very seriously outside forces, especially from PhDs, not MDs necessarily. Michael Pascal Hengartner, who's a Swiss psychologist, is also producing a lot of information, very well, rigorous, constructed pieces on the problems with withdrawal and the lack of knowledge. So there's something that's kind of moving, but it's not medical, it's more everything else.
Wayne has a question.
Would it be okay to quickly jump in on, because is it okay to add a couple thoughts to that?
Oh,
previous question?
absolutely,
Because
absolutely.
it's
Do
such an
it.
important one. One thing I've come to believe that it's of course very hard to do this, but I think finding ways to put ourselves in the mindset, in the shoes of your average psychiatrist when we're talking about these issues is so important, because if our goal is to actually make real change happen, as I mentioned earlier, we have to reach beyond the choir. We have to build bridges, which of course is hard to think about doing when so many of us have been really traumatized and harmed, and so much harm is happening on a daily basis. But I think I know at this point, I've heard from just so many scared and confused practitioners, like psychiatrists and other professions too, who I think are too afraid really to face the consequences of what this means for them, for their ability to, pay their bills and bring their children through college, and, this job they've put so many years and so much money and so much heart into schools and trainings and all of that. And now, they're being faced with the fact that these drugs they thought were helping aren't. Not only that, they're making things worse for many people. And not only that, getting off of these drugs for so many people is this hellish experience. I think we have to really tap into, at the heart level, a deep well of empathy, so that not even for their sakes necessarily, but for our cause. And so when we think about how to make these spaces for psychiatrists to feel comfortable entering, I often will, because I have the experience of having been indoctrinated myself, I was never non-compliant until the end. I kind of share that with the psychiatrists. Like I was a believer in this thing that they are believers in too. So I can return to that old me when I'm speaking to a psychiatrist and think about, how is what I'm saying right now reaching them? And I just think the spaces that we need to build have to have empathy at their heart. Otherwise, I think we'll only push the psychiatric profession further away, and which, of course, we don't want to do, because we want psychiatrists to say, you know what? Wow, I actually have been inadvertently harming people. I want to do something about that. I want to learn about how to help my patients safely taper. And when enough psychiatrists share that, then hopefully they can actually shift the standard of care within the APA, because that's an important step, of course, for anything really to change. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. I know it's kind of some people are probably like, fuck that. But it really strategically, I think it's important.
Yeah.
Well, may I just comment on my experiences of psychiatry and psychiatrists. In the whole, I find them that they're willfully ignorant about withdrawal and discontinuation. They don't really care about the secondary effects of their products that they force people like me to take. The head of the service of the poll here told me that I had a chemical imbalance of my brain. So that when I heard him say that after being after reading Robert Whittaker and others, I didn't know what to say to him because he was so ignorant. And my psychiatrist, who is Dr. Francois Penot, said to me, "Do you know that ERMs have been able to find differences in the brain between schizophrenics and normal people?" And I asked her, I said, "Well, have you read the studies?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, be very careful about what you advance when you say things like that, because you have no understanding of what the study says or how it was built or how it was conducted. So you can't really comment and tell me that that's the truth if you've never seen the study." So you see, I'm a little wary because I've been over 40 years now on neuroleptics. I know that I'm addicted to them because when I try and come off, I just blow a fuse. And if that's not an addiction, I don't know what is. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John. And in a way, I think we can put what you said and what Laura said together. You know, the fact that mainstream psychiatry is so believing in the value of the drugs and so sort of indebted to it or embedded in it, it makes it very hard for them to even believe in the research that they read that says these drugs are not good for people.
They don't read the research, Al. That's the problem.
They don't read it, and if they do read it, John, they're likely to be looking for problems with it, not really accepting it as being the truth. And that's why I think we do have to have empathy for them, because they are so embedded in what I would consider a wrong practice. And I think some good things are happening, you know, but they're little by little happening. For instance, I know a psychologist in Philadelphia, a couple of psychiatrists or a psychiatrist sent his patient to him for therapy. And the patient was doing so well in therapy that the psychiatrist called him up and said, "What do you do? What are you doing to help this person?" And the psychologist told him about therapy. And then the psychiatrist asked him to supervise him. He says, "Can you teach me how to do therapy? You know, so I can learn how to be a therapist." So there are some good things happening, but I've got to tell you that I'm a member of a group that was led by a guy named Mickey Weinberg. And Mickey, for years, has been working hard on changing things, you know, making a difference, doing something to really make a difference in how people who are going through hard times are helped and how the system helps them. And he believes, and I think I agree with him, that the way this is going to happen is when the general public stops believing in it, that's when it will change. Okay. And that's going to take quite a bit of time. It's going to take the general public to finally say, no, we don't want that kind of treatment, quote unquote. That's not going to help us. We don't believe in it, and we're not going to pay for it. That's when it's going to change. I think that's right. And of course, we're involved in trying to make a difference in various ways.
Al.
Wayne had a question.
Please. Can I ask the question? It's for David. Thanks for doing this, David. I know you're exceptionally busy. My question that I've been struggling with for a while is most people well, I can't say most people, but many people get hooked on the psychiatric drugs after admitted to the hospital on an emergency basis. And whenever I've been at any of these talks with drugs about psychiatric drugs, I'm surprised that there hasn't been somebody saying, well, I have a relative who ran down the street naked, or I have a relative who was threatening to kill somebody. And the only thing that worked is for them to be put on drugs. So acknowledging that sometimes people get into an altered state where they need some degree of containment, which probably shouldn't be more than 5 or 6 days. They go into the hospital, they're in this state, they're put on a massive dose of psychiatric drugs, and then they're told that they have to, you know, whatever, they have to be on the drugs for the rest of their life, et cetera, et cetera. I'm wondering, you know, how we can deal with that particular position, you know, that maybe, you know, I don't like to admit it, but maybe the drugs would be helpful for 3 or 4 days to get somebody off that state where they might be doing harm. I'm open to whatever you say.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. It's a practical point. It's a real point. It's what many people who might not be now on this webinar might think immediately. Someone is running down the street, is going to hurt themselves, and we got to do something. That's what a lot of people would say. We got to do something. And there's not much thinking about the ethical issues around, do you have power over your body, and do you have the right to destroy yourself and all this. Most people just think instinctively, you got to control that. You have to do something about that. You can't just let this person do that. And so that's the motivation to give a drug. Now, if it was just that, this containment or just tranquilization, if it was called that, it would be a progress, because we know that it wouldn't last so long to just make someone more tranquil. And we would then also entertain alternative ways like they used to, padded rooms. And I don't mean seclusion necessarily. All I'm saying is that that would be a progress to turn back the clock and just think of tranquilization rather than cure, because cure implies that there's some deficit in the person that has to be cured, treated. And that's where the drug companies make a lot of their money. They sell to us that this is a lifelong chronic disorder that's just begun, and now we must intervene on it the rest of the lives. And that's why we have the names that go with it, schizophrenia or schizophrenia spectrum disorder or what have you. But if it's just, I went crazy, I'm out of control, and I might not need, but society might feel better if I'm controlled for a little time rather than treated for my chronic severe mental illness for the rest of my life. That might be progress, believe it or not. So that's my answer. My answer is we've got to get the cultural notion we have to abandon is that we suffer from these lifelong chronic illnesses that make us act this way. Because the disconnect is that we keep being told we have all these evidence-based methods that are coming up with these cures and these treatments that are so effective. But yet when we look out on the street, we see a lot more people that appear to need. There's the incidence of depression and mania and everything is just going up. And yet we're told we have these really effective treatments that are going through the highest rigorous trials. That's a huge disconnect. It doesn't make sense. This so-called.
What I'd like to know is how many people are being forcibly drugged against their will. I believe that runs into millions worldwide, and you can't really talk about a therapy when you're forcing someone to do something which is perhaps against his will. And there needs to be other therapies, alternatives to forced drugging, That's something which is evident, I think, to everybody.
I agree. I think, but it's not evident to everybody. I agree that we can either react to crises and then get coercive, which is what happens to millions of people, tens of millions, I'm sure, or we can think of possibly more nuanced, preventive, certainly voluntary methods. That's the choice the systems face constantly.
There must be alternatives to what's going on now. It seems to me self-evident, but no professional, as they call them, because I get the feeling that people work in psychiatry just to earn money, just like the bribes of a mafia to get houses and cars. And don't really care about what they're doing. Don't think about what they're doing. That's the really serious and very grave paradox about psychiatry, as far as I'm concerned.
The way
Yeah, there certainly are lots of alternatives, and we could talk about that. Ron, go ahead.
And I've been doing this for years. I've known you for a long time, David, and you've taught me a lot over that time. But to me, it's a matter of rights. And it really comes down to, do you have a right over your body and your actions if you're not hurting anyone? And what happens to people is very subjective. I don't believe that there's more than a few people who would really hurt themselves or others, but it's the fear of people who see them, that they need to protect them and violate their rights. And the other aspect is we don't put the political will into alternatives that could be, especially with peers, people who've had lived experience, who would be able, perhaps 3 or 4 peers shifting off over time, could stay with somebody that needs somebody to be there so that nothing happens, to protect them from falling in the hands of the police. So I'll put just a little plug in for Mind Freedom, which is sponsoring this, and also Al is a board member. We're really concentrating on rights, and you don't know this, Al, but we're about to get out a shield alert for what's happening in California, working with the protection and advocacy lawyers, because Patton State Hospital right now has had 10 deaths from COVID, and there's a suit by the lawyers that we're trying to drum up public opinion on this. And I'd encourage you to look at what we're doing at Mind Freedom with SHIELD in order to protect people's rights. And it's basically asking people to just write a letter, or forward what we've written in a phone call to the newspaper, the legislature, the administrators.
Ron, this is Celia. That is wonderful.
I'm glad.
Yeah, I think that's better than the other petition I sent you. This is great. Please send it to me whenever it's done.
Yeah, I just got it.
So I can send it out. Oh, you just got it. Okay.
Okay, are there other, let's open it up a little bit, and I'm sorry that we lost Jim.
Yeah.
He's emailed to say he can't get back in. So he's been trying to get back in, just so folks know.
He's been trying to get back in and he can't get back in.
Mm-hmm.
Susan, give him the ID number and the password. That's how I got sealed.
Yeah, I emailed it to him, but I get a message back that he's not checking his email. So I don't know whether he's getting my message or not.
Does anybody have a phone number for Jim? I have a phone number for him.
I'll call him, Al. You keep going.
You want to call him? Give him a call.
Yeah, just tell him to check his email.
And give him
from Susan.
Give him the ID and the password. Okay. Any other comments, questions?
We've got a few that are waiting that have already asked. Wayne is the first one who's had a question.
Okay, Wayne. Maybe you're muted, Wayne.
You're muted, yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, go.
It's unfortunate that Jim was having the technical difficulties that he was having, because I would have preferred him to be here, because I have spoken to him twice on the phone. And Al, I've also spoken to you, but it was well over a year ago. And at that time I had been in contact with an organization that I believe was started by Robert Whitaker, and there was a woman there that was located, I believe, in California, that I had tried to speak with. But I just want to say briefly, in my presentation, maybe somewhat discombobulated, but with everything that's being said, and I agree with everything being said about awareness and change and all these different things, but at the same time, what about the people who, in my case, I had a complete faith in the doctors, and for someone like me, there will be no closure, because I got into the mental health, which is really a system of illness, by accident, because I was given Xanax by a primary care doctor in 1992. And of course, we know in 1992, we didn't have any of the information that we have now and that has come out over the last several years. But of course, I have read Anatomy of an Epidemic, and I have read Drug-Induced Dementia, A Perfect Crime by Dr. Grace Jackson. And I have read the Zyprexa papers, and I even bought, that's why I wish Jim was still here, because I have bought 5 copies of the Zyprexa papers, and I gave 4 copies of them away. But I find that the emotional pain that I'm experiencing because of being poisoned, in other words, I had a regular life. I never had any type of, and I've heard this from other people, so I know I'm not an anomaly. I know I'm not the only person. I had a regular life. I did well in school. I went to work. I was working for a huge company. I had been there nearly 20 years. But after being drugged by psychiatry for 7 years, with that last year being Risperdal in 1998 and 99, which I believe was the nail in the coffin, and I had no idea what Risperdal was. I didn't know what SSRIs were. I didn't know what benzodiazepines were. I didn't know what neuroleptics were. I didn't know any of this. And you're going to have to forgive me too if my anger seems misplaced. But I ended up on disability and losing my career of nearly 20 years because I had been poisoned by so-called doctors.
I agree. I entirely agree with you, Wayne.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate that, because I could identify what you were saying. And what I have now, even among people who are advocating for what is going on, not anger at you, but anger that we cannot get this crime. This is a crime against humanity. This isn't what Laura was saying. I thought she made a good point about, they talk about the semantics of withdrawal versus discontinuation and all this. While all this talking is going on, as all of you are probably all too well aware, thousands and thousands and thousands of lives are being destroyed.
Millions.
And luckily, as I sit here in my comfortable home, living independently, which I have been able to do for 20 plus years now, because I get a pension from my former company and Social Security. But that's not the point. I was 38 years old when I was disabled. I'll turn 60 next week. And I am just finding out some of these crimes that were committed against me in the last few years. And one of the things that makes me so lividly angry is the fact that there is nothing that we can do about apparently what has been done to us. And it's just mind-boggling. Yes, I understand the corruption. Yes, I understand the pharmaceutical industry is making a lot of money. Yes, I understand psychiatry and the mental health system makes a lot of money. Yes, I understand it's politics. Yes, I understand it's this, it's that, it's the other. But at the same time, what is being done about those of us where our lives have been stolen? We need more. We need people not in these small meetings here. We need people to be on like late night talk shows, pushing their books there. Go there and talk about anatomy of an epidemic. Go to these larger audiences or something to talk about these things. One of you said the importance would be to making the public more aware, to where the public is less likely to accept this. Well, really not enough people know this is going on.
Yeah, take it
Okay,
to the
Wayne.
public.
Okay, Wayne, I thank you for that. Let's see if David or Laura have a response to this. Laura, no, David, you have a response?
It's just my, yes, I have a response, which is Wayne is exactly right. There may be no closure. It won't be the first time that people's lives are stolen from them by medicine or by other institutions that prey, that feed upon people. They feed upon their pain. This is kind of like, I think Thomas Saz coined that expression, existential cannibalism, which is how we live off, we feed on the pain and the suffering, and we create it too. And there's no closure. You're right. How you'll find closure will probably, I don't know what to tell you, but I think you're absolutely right. That is the tragedy. That is why it's so important, is that people are left holding the pain that has been caused.
Thank you.
And I just to say, it's not that I don't have a response, it's just the baby starting to act up a bit, but I just want to say, Wayne, your anger is so righteous and healthy and important, and
let me just
stop.
thank you very much, because I talked with you as well on the phone back in 2016 when I had been cold turkeyed off of 2 benzodiazepines at the same time. Okay, so I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate the anger also, and the realization of the fact that people are really being hurt. We're sitting here talking and trying to discuss this in a kind of a rational way, and we want to have some empathy for psychiatrists, but people are being hurt every day really badly. And one of the things that's frustrating to me is that there are approaches to helping people, basically people who have fallen into psychosis, to the most serious mental disorder. There are ways that really work. They're not being used in the United States. There's Soteria. Just let me give you 3 of them. You can look them up. There's a Soteria house, which now there's one in Vermont. There's Open Dialogue. There's Healing Homes, which is developed in Sweden. These are approaches that work, and what they do is they use people's self-healing properties. They keep people safe as they go through the experience, and they work, but they're not being used in the United States. So this is really a big problem, and I think the fact that people like yourself can't get legal recourse is also a big problem.
That is one of the things that is even increasing my anger, because as Mr. Cohen stated, and I thought the existential cannibalism was a good analogy, but and please don't take what I'm saying as being disrespectful or however I may be coming across. There's really no way for me to verbalize what I feel is the crime that has been committed against me and some of these comments over here to the right that I have been reading, and the crimes that were committed against many of us. And I cannot totally, even with all the reasons that we all are aware of why this is happening, I still cannot wrap my head around that it's acceptable, that it's still going on. Because if you look at benzodiazepines, for example, in chapter 7 of Anatomy of an Epidemic, they held hearings on benzodiazepines in Congress in 1979. So,
Wayne,
it's
not only acceptable, Wayne, it's the standard of care. It's the standard of care. In other words, if a psychiatrist didn't prescribe and somebody then committed suicide, that psychiatrist would be liable for not practicing in the standard of care. That's where we are. So maybe someone can talk about the problem. I wish Jim were here, because the fact that people don't have recourse to the legal system to get help, people who have been harmed in the way that Wayne has, is a big problem. I don't know what the answer to that is.
And also someone like me, let me just say this real quick. When I started finding out about all this stuff and first heard about tardive dysphoria about 11 or 12 years ago, and I was still kind of heavily medicated then, or I was on like 2 antidepressants and 2 benzos, how I've held it together for 22 years on my own, and I'm completely financially on my own, is I don't even know how I've done it. But it's like, now I've lost my point. I've lost my point, what I was going to say.
Okay.
Oh,
David, you have something to say here?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
The only thing I can say is I gotta go. I have to leave. I'm so sorry. I have a 4:30 my time a meeting. I've got to go. So I apologize for this.
Thank
but
you.
Thank you very much. And Wayne, you're on. I just again.
I hope you don't mind my passion. I'm very.
No, are you kidding? Are you kidding? It's you sort of exemplify. It's good that you have the passion and that you're angry, because yeah, we need anger too. We need anger. That's all I can say. It's terrible. But thank you very much. I'm sorry I have to go so soon. It's always wonderful to hear the voices here. And thank you, Al. And Jim, I'm so sorry for Jim. I hope we can get him back on. Take care, Laura, too. Take care, all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
All right. This is Lilo.
Go ahead, Lilo.
From Mississippi. I came to your meetings when it was the International Center for the Study of Psychiatry and Psychology. I'm from Mississippi, and I'm still looking for what I was looking. I think Dr. Cohen was a presenter there at the meeting, Dr. Whitaker. But I'm still looking. You all used to publish some information, and I was late getting on because I had to come home from work. I'm not a Zoom fan, but this is it. This is good, excellent. I can see it for this kind of use function. But you all used to publish the doctors that were in an area where we could seek this kind of help. But I haven't actually been keeping up with you all, because I was coming to the meetings, the international meetings, but my niece, who I was coming for, was not coming with me. So, I just stopped coming. But do you have anybody in the Deep South who has caught on to the vision? That's what I was looking for in 2003, 2004, and 2005 when I was with you all.
If you go to the website, Leela, is that your name, Lilo?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. If you go to the website, the International Society for Ethical Psychology and Psychiatry, it's www.psychintegrity.org. I'll put it in the chat. Psych Integrity. There is a list of providers who will help without drugs. who don't use drugs. The other thing you can do is if you send me an email, I will see if I can find some providers in your area. I'll put my email in the chat, and you send me an email, and I'll see if I can find somebody in your area. Okay.
All right.
So
All right.
we've got
That'd
some
be
people
fine.
who've been waiting to ask questions.
Okay.
Maggie's the first one who's been waiting patiently.
Okay.
Maggie, go ahead.
Okay, hi. The question I wanted to ask was because as someone who's a young person, I've noticed that a lot of people kind of like in the millennial and Gen Z generation have really negative responses to when I try to talk about, you know, my experiences with withdrawal and with psych meds, because there's a lot of like pro medication rhetoric in my generation, and when I try to talk about it, a lot of people kind of come back and say that I'm ignorant or that I am like hurting people who want to take psych meds, and that I'm anti-psych med, and that I'm making people scared, and just a lot of people really don't like when I speak about this. So my question is kind of, you know, how do we create a space where people can feel safe and open talking about these experiences? Because I didn't even know withdrawal was a thing until I went through it. So it's important to me that more people know. So how do we create that space to talk about these things, especially with young people who are not really open to those discussions?
Laura, are you still here?
Oh, she's gone. Baby needed attention.
Wow. Ron, can you respond to that?
Yeah, Maggie, if you don't mind, where do you live? In what city or state?
I live in New Jersey.
Okay, if you, there's a number of places in New Jersey that have spaces for people, for self-help groups and different things like that. If you would write just a note, we can get you some information. Write a note to the office at mindfreedom.org and we'll try and respond.
I'll put that into the chat.
One of the things also that we're doing, Maggie, is we have affiliates in different areas of the country and also in Canada, different areas, and Australia and Ireland, where people do just what you're saying. One of the problems is that young people are more difficult to get influence to respond to this. But there's ways that we found that have been successful in the past. So glad to welcome you.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to get involved more.
Maggie, there's an organization also that was really created by students called the Icarus Project. I don't know if you know about it.
Yeah, I'm familiar. I think it's Fireweed Collective now. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay, a different name. That's a way of connecting with other young people. You know, other than that, I think, you know, maybe there might be some online places you can go to connect with people who have, you know, believe the same thing you do and want to spread the word about it. Maybe there are other people on the call here who might have some suggestions.
So this is Susan. Could I jump in for a second?
Yes, Susan.
Hi, Al. Hi, everybody. So I think this is a very important question to ask Maggie. And I think it's almost like the crux of the matter. And someone earlier spoke to this, and that is, how do we get the conversation going? How do we get it not just to the believers, you know, the choir, but how do we get it going outside the choir? And I'm not jumping in here because I have an answer, because I ask this question like almost daily to myself. How do we get it outside the choir? And I think I think there's like a whole culture shift that has to happen and language shift and all of that. So it's not an easy question, but keep asking it, please, because the more we think about this, we have to get in, and I see Jim on, I think. Do I see him? No, I don't. Okay, I thought I saw him.
Yeah, I'm on.
Oh, you are? Okay, cool. So this is all I'm going to say. I'm going to let Jim jump in, but keep asking it, and we got to get in the public media more, not just our own media. Thank you. Go, Jim.
Okay. Good to see you, Jim. Okay, take the floor, please.
All right. Well, I'm sorry that happened. I guess I better not try and share my screen. I had a PowerPoint that I was going to do, and it's not that big a deal. So the first thing I wanted to say is that it turns out I wrote it. There's an issue of the Journal of Critical Psychology, Counseling and Psychotherapy, a special issue on withdrawal from prescribed psychiatric drugs. So people might want to check that out, the Journal of Critical Psychology, Counseling and Psychotherapy. I've got an article in there, and there are a bunch of other ones, not all of whom have letters after their name. So one of the things I wanted to say is that I really appreciate Love You Lead On and Mind Freedom doing this. And even though this is free, if people find it valuable and you want to support them, I think that would be a good thing to do. So the thing, what my article is about and what I wanted to talk about is, I'm a lawyer, so that's what I do. And the question has come up about, well, can you sue over not being informed about withdrawal effects? And when you look at making a claim, there are certain things that you have to establish. One is, let me see if I can. One is, was there a duty to inform? Another one is, who might have such a duty? Was the duty breached, or in other words, violated? And did the breach cause harm? So that's just basically any type of personal injury lawsuit. And so then the question is, what about informed consent for psychiatric drug withdrawals? And one of the things, it's from this case called Cobbs versus Grant. It used to be that basically, the doctors were MDities, whatever they said goes. But in 1972, there was this prominent case called Cobbs versus Grant, where the court said, a person of adult years and in sound mind has the right in the exercise of control over his own body to determine whether or not to submit to lawful medical treatment, and the patient's consent to treatment to be effective must be an informed consent. So that's the question, is informed consent. So who can you sue? That was one of the questions, who has the liability? And one thing that's clear, of course, is that prescribers, the doctors normally have liability for failure to inform, but everybody wants to sue the drug companies. One of the reasons is they have a lot of money, and the other is that they're really not very truthful about it, or at least in their marketing. But it's there's this legal principle called the learned intermediary doctrine that in most of the cases insulates the drug companies from being liable. And the idea is that the doctors get all the information, basically from the drug company, and then they make the recommendation. And the duty flows from the doctor to the patient, not from the drug company. And so then the question is, well, you hear about all these cases where drug companies have been sued, and that's where they haven't informed the doctors. So for example, my book, the Zyprexa papers, that was a huge suit, and the whole basis of it was that they had hidden from the doctors that Zyprexa causes diabetes and other metabolic problems. And so that was the basis for that. But if you look at the labels, the approved FDA labels for psych drugs, they basically talk about withdrawal effects. And so the drug companies have insulated themselves that way. But the doctors don't really tell. I mean, my experience is, and what I've heard is, doctors don't ever really talk about withdrawal effects. I don't know what other people's experiences are, and I'm really sorry I've missed the rest of this conversation. But so I have a personal example of this, and it's one where I don't know if David's still on, but his book, Your Drug May Be Your Problem, really ended up helping me. And I had my my sinuses reamed out. This was 20 years or so ago, and I was like the model patient on the checkups. I was doing really well, and then one time, I don't know, it didn't look so good when he looked up my nose, and he wanted to prescribe. This was a GP. He wanted to prescribe prednisone for for the inflammation. And I asked, he didn't say anything about side effects. And then I asked him, and he said, oh, well, you might get kind of the bodybuilder's buzz. And I said, hey, wait a minute. If I don't sleep, I can, I've been hospitalized for that before. And he says, oh, don't worry. And I figured, well, I could deal with it because I had this regime where if I got in trouble sleeping, I would take benzos just to sleep and break the cycle. And I would never take them for more than a night or so. But I got on the prednisone, and you're supposed to do 3 and then for 2 days and 2 and then 1, and you're not supposed to abruptly withdraw. And I couldn't sleep. And I took the benzos, which I think probably was Xanax and Restoril. And it really wasn't working. And I took it for a few days. And then I basically quit. And I got a panic attack. And I had, I'd never had a panic attack before. And that was really weird. And so I went to David's book and Peter Bregan's book, Your Drug May Be Your Problem. And they have 3 sections. I looked up in the index, and they have main effects, adverse effects, and withdrawal effects. And I saw that panic attack was listed. And so that was a great comfort for me, because then I realized what was happening. Anyway, so getting back to the legal stuff. So you've got the prescribers you can sue, the drug companies probably not. Other issues that come up are, well, let me go, I want to do something else for. So then what does informed consent mean? I mean, it says you have to have informed consent, and there are really three different formulations of it. One is, and kind of the old-fashioned one, is what I would call the standard of care, is what would doctors normally tell you if about withdrawal effects. And if it was a standard in the community, that's basically a medical malpractice standard. Then if the doctors wouldn't tell you, then you didn't have the right to know. But that has been criticized as, well, it's not what by courts, and it's been changed by certain courts. Well, it's not really what doctors would tell you. It's what's relevant to you making a decision. So then there are two versions of that. One is the objective standard, which is what would a reasonable person, person consider what you, what you weren't told relevant to your decision, and would that have made a reasonable person make a different decision? That's been criticized because by courts, and other courts say, well, but it's not what a reasonable person, it's what this particular person would have decided. And that's what is called the subjective standard. And that's been criticized because the idea is, well, if you weren't told something and that bad thing happened, then of course you're going to say that you would have made a different decision. So that's those are the three different standards. And if you're talking about, you have to find out what it is in your state. So then the big, then the question is, what might you earn, or what might you win? And that's called damages. And there's economic and non-economic damages. Economic damages are basically lost wages or lost income, and non-economic damages are things like pain and suffering. Economic damages also includes medical costs. And where the big payoff is usually is in economic damages, because a lot of most states, I would say, have succumbed to the doctor's lobby and enacted restrictions on economic damages, oftentimes in maybe the $250,000 range. And so, but then our people, if you've been diagnosed with a serious mental illness, then the assumption is that, oh, well, you don't really have any lost income because you never, really had the prospects for much gainful employment. So then other, kind of impediments to prevailing is the statute of limitations, is sometimes part of the so-called tort reform. But basically the statutes of limitations, which is how soon after you knew or should have known about the injury you have to sue, and those tend to be 2 or 3 years, which can be pretty short, which is not that long. One of the things that you can do, I mean, the statute of limitations is told, in other words, it's stopped if you're, not competent. But I don't recommend people try, I think there are more problems with, if you establish that you're not competent than having a personal injury claim. So I don't recommend doing that. So the statute of limitations is a problem. And then another one that comes up a lot is what the lawyers call proximate cause, which is, well, what caused it? If you're on half a dozen different drugs, and you had had half a dozen different prescribers, which drug and which prescriber is liable is the cause of your withdrawal problems. So kind of the bottom line is, that people's rights to informed consent are violated all the time, and legal redress is pretty hard to obtain. So that's it. Again, I'm sorry I got thrown out, and I'm interested in having people get back to their discussion.
Okay, Jim, thanks. Any questions for Jim?
I have a
Comments?
question.
Yes.
And I had said, Jim, when you had the technical difficulties when I spoke several moments ago, you missed my rant because I'm as you well know, Jim, from our previous conversations, I'm pretty angry. You know, not that the anger is going to do me any good, but that's just the way it is. But I had shared how the fact that I had spoken with you a couple of times along with Laura. I've also spoken to Al and some other people. But I had shared how Anatomy of an Epidemic and also Drug-Induced Dementia, A Perfect Crime. And I also shared how I had given away 5 copies of your book, the Zyprexa Papers. But my concern goes back, again, Jim, since you missed what I said, to the fact that I am a person whose life has been stolen from me. And I am very angry because of these loopholes that you are referring to. And it's just, I cannot believe still, and this was the point that I missed a few moments ago when I said I lost my point right before Ben had to leave, is that these are crimes against humanity. These aren't like, oh, there was negligence with the car maker. They messed up the tires. And so we've got a class action lawsuit because I don't know, Firestone made bad tires. This is so humongous that it goes beyond anything like that. And when I called into the podcast with Lawrence Simon, who wrote Psychotherapy and the Drugs We Live, or Stories We Live By, that book, when you were on that podcast many, many months ago, probably over a year ago, and I explained very briefly then what had happened to me and how I was drugged after having a normal life into disability. I was poisoned by people that call themselves doctors and pharmaceutical greed and this whatever this is that is allowing this to go on. Sometimes I wonder whether it's even partly spiritual in the time that we're living in, but I don't want to get off into all that. But I still cannot wrap my mind around the fact that even when you compensate for greed, corruption, I think Mr. Cohen used the word existential cannibalism. I've been taking notes as you all have been speaking. I still don't understand why in 2021, when Anatomy of an Epidemic was released in 2010, it was updated and re-released in 2015. Drug-Induced Dementia, A Perfect Crime was released in 2009. Then you had Mad in America before that. In other words, all these things, and then all the things that Mr. Cohen was speaking of, all the things that everybody knows about, and this is still going on and nothing's being done about it, except, yes, we're slowly maybe making more people aware. But I think Mr. Simon on that podcast that I called into mentioned that nothing this big has happened since the Spanish Inquisition, if you'll remember that.
Can
But
I just say,
question, Wade,
it's just that I am a person who will have no closure. They stole my life from me. And I have to live with the fact that what they did took away my career. Thank God I have been strong enough that I held it together. But what they have taken from me cannot be replaced.
Mm-hmm.
And
so
why,
Wayne, let's see
why these crimes against humanity are continued to allow to go on.
Okay, that's a question. Let's see if Jim has a response to that, Wayne.
I got a question after you. Well, it's terrible what's happened to you. And sadly, it's happened to I think literally millions of people. I mean, that's what anatomy of an
I said
epidemic
that
is.
several minutes ago, millions of people.
Yeah, and I think anatomy of an epidemic, documents that pretty well, and other people. So I'm just trying to be realistic about the legal system, and I think, I don't think we're winning on this. I think there, certain pockets of light, such as the inner compass, and what the good guys are doing. Dr. Cohen, David Cohen, Bregan, and Grace Jackson, and Joanna Moncrief, and it's actually kind of amazing how many people feel like they need to write a book about what's going on. I mean, you don't have people writing books about how justifying psychiatry that much, but you have a lot of people saying, what great harm it's doing. So, I think of it that really we're talking about reparations as being, a potential theoretical remedy. I'm not saying that that's really in the cards, but I think that's the scope and type of thing that we're talking about. And what the most important thing is to, get the general public to understand what's going on. And there are a lot of forces against us. And one of the really interesting things about this pandemic and, the response is that the drug companies are now, have all been sainted by what they've done with the vaccines, and to a lesser extent, the therapeutics. And, it's just being ignored how basically, untruthful they are, and how the FDA too has been kind of sainted, and how much they fail in their charge to, protect the public. So I guess, it's not a very satisfactory answer at all. And I think just the public education is the most important thing, and the alternatives.
I see Jay.
Can I just say,
Hold on a second, John. You've already gone. I see Jay has her hand up.
Yes,
Okay.
Jay is next.
Yeah, thank you
Jay,
very
Jay.
much. I'd like to make a couple of points actually, and acknowledgements. Wayne, I can totally understand your anger. I didn't experience any kind of mental issue, but my son did. It's 2021. There's lots of people on this call here who have written books. There's only 43 people on participating right now. And, there's got to be something that these people writing these books could actually bring it to a bigger field, or to a bigger showcase to have this out there, because my kid experienced a psychosis. We went into the medical system, and the first thing they did was knock out the symptoms with olanzapine. And I'm really happy to hear Ron Bassman was talking earlier about maybe there could be something else they could do to let that person get some sleep. And then, because I can tell you, our experience, I got pissed off and I was angry. And that's how I found all these authors that are on this presentation today. But I had to read one book, and then read another book, and then read another book, and then read another book to actually get somewhere. So it's really frustrating, because with 43 people and all these books, you got a big ocean, a big wave to turn if you're going to expect the medical system to just change. So my point here is, what happened to my son is that he was the clearest he was when he came down off olanzapine. He wasn't maybe 2 or 3 months, but soon as he was off that, they actually started to titrate him up on Abilify. And we're thinking here, we're trusting these guys to do the right thing. But as he started to titrate up on Abilify, we started to lose him a bit more. He's doing okay now, but my question for anybody on board here is, why, when the person is doing well and they've taken him off that period of the initial psychosis, why did he have to be titrated up? Like, I don't get that. I don't understand it. And I wish Laura was still on here, because I'd like to know more about the solution and the alternatives and what can be done. Because we're told in the medical profession by psychiatrists that, so here's the kicker, and I wrote this down. My son, after seeing 3 different psychiatrists in the hospital, he was diagnosed with bipolar 1 after 7 days. So in their own literature, because we're involved in an EPI program here in BC, Canada, the literature says, and I've read it over and over, that any kind of diagnosis takes months to make a diagnosis like that. But here we are, given medication because he was diagnosed with bipolar 1 after 7 days only. So if I didn't get pissed off and started looking into this, there would have been no alternative given to us for a solution or anything else that could be done. And before I close, I just want to say I'm very thankful for Maggie, who spoke up, who is a young person, because I love all you guys who are talking, but everybody's got gray hair like me. So if the solution is going to come, it's going to come from people like Maggie and the young people that are for the people coming up behind us. So I'll shut up now, and hopefully somebody can comment on solutions and also on why my son had to be titrated up on a psych drug. Thank you.
Anybody?
I would just like to say that I can't answer that question. One of you professionals will have to say that. But I will say, along with what he said about the bipolar 1 thing, is that with me finding out approximately 15 years into being disabled that I had actually been poisoned into disability. And when I have tried to explain that to other people, that I was living a regular life, and until I got accidentally mixed up in this fucked up system that is criminal, I get gaslighted. I have been gaslighted. Like, oh no, that didn't really happen. Or if you go back and look at your records from 1992, there's a reason why they gave you that pill. Or, yeah, but you were 38 then, now you're getting ready to turn 60, so you've gotten older. So maybe that's why you're not feeling well.
Right. Okay, well, let me,
So
Wayne,
gaslighting
Wayne,
is another problem too.
Yeah, well, okay, thank you, Wayne, for that. Let me try and I'll talk to the solutions question. And let me tell you why they titrated up your son. It's because that's the only thing they know what to do. That's the only thing psychiatrists are trained in. They're trained in drugs. They don't know anything about psychotherapy. They're not trained in psychotherapy. So I'll give you my idea of the solution. One of the solutions is psychotherapy. Now, full disclosure, I'm a psychotherapist. Psychotherapy is really very effective. You know, what psychotherapy does is help people, first of all, accept what's going on with them as being understandable in terms of their life situation, what's happened to them, their experiences. And psychotherapy helps them learn how to use their thoughts and their emotions and their intentions and their behavior and their perceptions to live better, to be able to love the way they want to love, connect with other people the way they want to connect with other people, use their abilities in satisfying ways. Psychotherapy is incredibly effective, okay? Let me talk to your son's situation, okay? There is a program in Vermont right now that would help your son. And here's the way it works. It's called Soteria Vermont. And the way it works is this, Jay. Your son comes to the house. It's a home-like residence, 5 beds. Your son comes and they say, come on in. You can stay here as long as you want. We're just going to keep you safe and help you go through this experience. We're not going to put pressure on you to get better. We're not going to put pressure on you to go back the way you were. We're going to help you go through the experience, because whatever's happening to you must have some reason, must have some meaning in your life. We don't know why exactly, but we're going to help you go through it and maybe learn about it. Okay, so people stay at Soteria for about 6 months. And they've compared people at Soteria with people who go to the hospital. People at Soteria are doing better after 1 year or 2 years. They're doing better. Now, I learned about a man who was seriously psychotic, spent 2 years in hospitals and in the revolving door, went to Soteria, after 8 months, fully recovered. Okay? So it works, and open dialogue works, and Healing Homes works in Sweden. Look them up. And they don't use drugs as a primary modality treatment. They provide the person with a safe way, with a firming connection to go through the experience. But guess what? That's not very medical, Jay. Is it?
Here's the
It's not
thing.
very, let me finish. It's not very medical. So if I tell a psychiatrist, right, the psychiatrist, I'm telling him about how bad the drugs are, how they don't help, they hurt people, and he says, well, what do you propose? Well, what I propose is helping the person in a safe way go through the experience, because they'll recover. And you know what he'll say to me? I didn't go to med school for that. That's not what I went to med school for. Yeah, I know you didn't, but that's what works.
So
that's where we are. That's the problem. That's where we are.
So Al, we're very fortunate because we have found somebody on this panel to work with. But my anger comes from the fact that as a layperson going into this place in this situation, I had to look for it. There was nobody at the hospital that said, hey, you should probably ask the psychoanalysis or the psychologist to come on board. And the reality is that in this team that's surrounded around this kid, the psychiatrist is at the top. He's the leader. He's the one that's dictating what's going on. So, the first thing he says, you're on drugs for life, and this is who you are, and you've been labeled, and this is it. So now it's an uphill battle for us to go against that and explain to our son that, maybe, just maybe, there's an alternative here. So after 10 months of researching, I finally found someone that's a member of this audience today to work with him. And so I believe in what you're saying, but, I had to go through 10 or 12 books, keep digging, and it was not an alternative that was given by mainstream medicine.
Right. Yeah, this is the problem. This is where we're at, Jay. Now, this is a horrible situation, really. It's horrible. And this is just horrible. We don't have any good answers. Let me tell you what Mickey Weinberg did. Mickey Weinberg did a hunger strike in 2003. He said, I want the media to learn about how screwed up this is. Let's do a hunger strike. He had 6 people with him do a hunger strike. And what they did was say, we're not going to take any solid food until the American Psychiatric Association, the Surgeon General of the United States, and the National Alliance for Mentally Ill, NAMI, give us evidence that mental illnesses are caused by chemical imbalances and brain disorders and genetic anomalies, that psychiatric drugs are helpful and not harmful, that psychiatric drugs correct chemical imbalances. Give us the evidence. Well, American Psychiatric Association sent a textbook, and we had a scientific panel that debunked it easily. But the media wasn't interested in very much in this hunger strike. They didn't cover it.
No money, that's why, no money.
Yeah. So this is the problem. And now Mickey now we just produced a video. Okay, and the video is going to hopefully go viral. It's going to go on YouTube. And the video is about the association between psychiatric drugs and suicide and violence. There's absolute evidence that psychiatric drugs increase the risk of suicide and violence. And these mass shooters are all on the psychiatric drugs. So we're going to put the video out. Hopefully this, it'll go viral and the general public will see it and begin to question psychiatry. And that's what Mickey Weinberg and people like him are doing. So we've been on this for 2 hours, folks. And I don't know, I'm getting hungry. I don't know whether you want to stay on. I'm willing to stay on as long as you want to stay on.
I've just about got to go.
Well, here, can I interrupt here for a minute?
Yeah.
So we're going to be on next Wednesday. I'll be re-showing the video. The presenters will not be here, but I'll be re-showing the video. And then there'll be ample time for discussion amongst those that are here. There are 4 hands up for people that are asking questions, 2 of which haven't had a chance.
Okay.
Yesenia Loretta and, I don't know how you say it, Yesenia,
Okay.
they've been waiting for quite some time.
So
Okay.
I think Ron
Yesenia, want to go first?
I think Ron Bassman was going to comment on something Al was going to say when we were speaking. Is that okay before the other ones speak?
I'll be
Sure.
really quick. I just want to say, Jay, that you're to be commended for doing all this stuff and the research for your son. Many people can't do that, and that's an issue. I've been doing this work for close to 50 years, and we really have to persevere in it. And I think at the core is this notion of diagnosis, that, you know, these shortcuts that people who are professional use for treatment. And there's such diversity. I was listening to you talk, Al, and Soteria is a great program. Open Dialogue is a great program, but each person needs something different. I happen to know Jay and familiar with this, and he's doing something that somebody else might not be able to do. What I'd just like to emphasize is there are ways of helping people, but it can't be a template. It can't be an automatic. You really need to know the person, what their needs are, what are available. Plus, you have to have the person willing. You know, psychotherapy is great if a person wants to be in psychotherapy.
100%.
But usually when we are in these altered states where we're kind of overconfident, you know, if we're talking about a state that usually gets called bipolar, which I don't believe in any of the diagnoses, it's a hard thing to reach that person. Other times, person can be very depressed. But when we categorize people and we have a formula like is presently going on in medicine, we're going to miss all the possibilities for people. So I don't want to kind of keep talking. And I'm glad, Susan, that you brought up some people who haven't had an opportunity to speak.
Yeah, let's hear.
Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Yesenia.
Hi, I just had a few things to say. I've been following Psych Out and Ron Bassman and Jim Gottstein and all these things since probably 2008. And I have seen that just like the frustrations that a lot of people have spoken about, there hasn't been a lot of progress or a lot of changes. I can't say that 100% because I'm not behind the scenes doing any of the work, but I did want to say for WAL, W-A-L, I feel your pain.
I'm Wayne.
Because I do believe that my life as well was damaged and changed by other people that were trying to control my life and forced me into psychiatric treatment. I lost 20 years of my life. I ended up having a miscarriage. There was a medical malpractice that I couldn't follow through with. And it's just an example of how there's a lot of us that are going through a similar situation. And I understand your anger. But what I wanted to say is, I think that just like the Black Lives Matter movement, I feel like for the mental illness or psych out movement needs to be, like they've said, like other people have said, needs to be put on a platform that is more more international, more like on TV, you know, like for example, Oprah, she's starting this thing with Prince Harry, where they're gonna be making a show about mental illness and stuff. Well, I'm sure they're probably gonna go with the whole, medicating people type of thing. But I think voices like ours has to be heard, like Jim Gottstein, people who are kind of in the forefront need to be on shows like this, need to advocate to be on a larger platform so that internationally people can hear about this, because it's happening throughout the whole world. I'm not completely against meds. I have found that some meds have helped me temporarily when I needed them. I think that drugs, medications, for example, there are drugs like LSD, marijuana, stuff like that, that is starting to be is going to be incorporated in medical and especially psychiatric medicine. There's been articles on that. And I think that these things, if they're used in the proper way and they're not overused, or, you know, if they're established according to each person's individual needs, then I think these things can be helpful, but definitely not to force anyone, and definitely not to keep people on a regimen like that for the rest of their life. And that's what I wanted to say. I wanted to thank everybody because this helps me a lot. Fortunately, I have a very good psychiatrist. 3, in fact. One of them actually told me once, just so that you guys can see how true it is. I was in the hospital and the psychiatrist, he told my parents, take her off of these meds, because if you don't, she's gonna have to take them for the rest of her life. And he said, she doesn't need these. My parents were opposed, and they spoke about what he said. The hospital forced him to medicate me. And he told me, the hospital is forcing me to medicate you, but I'm gonna give you the medication and I want you to put it under your pillow and not take it. And when you get out of here, because I was in the psychiatric unit, when you get out of here, don't take them anymore. Well, of course, I was afraid of being sectioned again, being forced. And so I still am on some medications. But you know, that's what I had to say. I think it has to be a collaborative movement between people who are very experienced with this, getting in the forefront, you know. For example, I have personally, my brother-in-law works for Fader, and my sister worked for Spin magazine when it was out. I don't think it's out anymore, but they always met famous people all the time. I think if we reached out to these people, even like kind of like a Jehovah's Witness does when they preach to someone, because I used to be a Jehovah's Witness. If you reach out to the person directly and you say, look, have you seen what this is about? And can you come to this forum or something? You know, then that can open their eyes, open their mind, because they're only hearing one side. They're only hearing, oh, medication is good and there's a lot of mental illness and it's all being diagnosed, and bipolar and schizophrenia and this and that and OCD and autism, blah, 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 blah. So that's what I wanted to say. I hope I explained myself well, because I have a little trouble communicating, and of course I'm nervous.
Good night, everyone. I'm going.